Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to AMC Mailbag, the mailbag show over here at AMC Movie News, where all we do is take your questions via email, sometimes via Twitter. Today it's just going to be via email. And I'm just going to let you know, too, that if you ever do have a question you would like us to address on AMC Mailbag or on AMC Movie Talk Monday through Friday, you can email us at amcmovietalk@gmail.com. So you can email your questions to us there anytime, 24/7. And every day on AMC Movie Talk, we go through some questions. On the weekends, all we do is take your questions. My name is John Campy. I'm the editor-in-chief of AMC Movie News. I'm so glad you decided to join us today on this fine Saturday. And this is a lot more laid back, a lot more relaxed. We'll talk very casually about movies. Think of this as more like a talk radio show. I know it's a ridiculous analogy, but it is kind of accurate. And on the show, we talk a little more loose, and we also talk a bit about, behind the scenes stuff at AMC Movie News, things we sometimes won't talk about on AMC Movie Talk Monday through Friday. And I'm just really glad you're here today. So we got a bunch of questions we're going to get to today, but today's a pretty big day. It's Saturday right now, April 5th. And it's early in the morning, and I'm going to do a few things here, but then me and a bunch of the guys from AMC Movie News, we're going to go shoot our AMC spoilers review for Captain America 2. That should be online later tonight. Watch for that. Spoilers, I love Captain America 2. It is so freaking good. I actually made a statement today on my Facebook page. And now, granted, I've seen The Dark Knight about 20 times, and I've seen Captain America the Winter Soldier 3 times. So, maybe my opinion may change a little bit after I've seen The Winter Soldier about 7 or 8 more times, and I am going to see it about 7 or 8 more times. But I made a statement on my Facebook page today that's already got some discussion going. And I said this. I said, I'm ready to say it. Captain America the Winter Soldier is better than The Dark Knight. How can you say that? I said it. I said it took me a while to say it, and like I said, they're so close to me, and they're two very different films, but they're so close to me that it took me 3 screenings of Captain America to say that. Once again, check in with me again later. I mean, like when you're talking about the two films, Captain America, The Dark Knight, both brilliant, and there is no arguing. The first thing that a person who wants to say The Dark Knight is going to go to is the Heath Ledger performance as the Joker. No doubt. No doubt. Out of all the characters in both films, The Dark Knight and Captain America Winter Soldier, Heath Ledger's the Joker is one of the greatest film villains of all time. Not just comic book film villains, one of the greatest film villains of all time. And you've got to put that notch on The Dark Knight column as far as, which is better, stuff like that. But I do believe this. I really do. And this is what kind of started to sway my mind, because after the first 1 or 2 screenings of Captain America, I still felt like, yeah, Captain America 2 Winter Soldier is a new level of excellence, but is it that Avengers The Dark Knight kind of level of eliteness? And the reason, what kind of tipped me over the edge about Captain America The Winter Soldier over, say, a Dark Knight, was, granted, while Heath Ledger's Joker, clearly the superior villain, and the Winter Soldier is a great villain, but Heath Ledger's Joker is a better villain. He just is. But after I got beyond that, I thought, you know what? What really tips the scale to me, and what I realized in watching Winter Soldier for the 3rd time, was this. The way the movie handles, portrays, and gives us the hero. Chris Evans's Steve Rogers is just a more compelling, in this film, is just a better presented character than Bruce Wayne was in The Dark Knight. I mean, The Dark Knight, that was Heath Ledger's movie. That was the Joker's movie. He stole it, and that's great. And Christian Bale is a great Batman. But when you watch Winter Soldier, if you just watch the villains, Heath Ledger, but if you just watch the heroes, to me, Steve Rogers is a better presented, better portrayed, more layers to him, better conflict in him than, say, Bruce Wayne did in The Dark Knight. Captain America Winter Soldier, far superior action scenes than The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight that's not one of its big strengths. The Dark Knight's big strengths are other things, so it's almost an unfair comparison. But if we're going to run down the laundry list, like to me, the action sequences in Captain America Winter Soldier, I don't think anybody will disagree. Even the diehard Dark Knight fans will disagree that the action sequence is much better in Winter Soldier. I thought the supporting cast was better. Once you get outside of Christian Bale and Heath Ledger, and once you get outside of, say, Sebastian Stan and Chris Evans, I thought overall the supporting cast was better. And as much as I love The Dark Knight, and everybody knows I have it up in that echelon of amongst the greatest comic book films ever made, one of my criticisms of that film has always been that I've always felt like the surrounding characters were a little bit hokey. Like, for instance, the Eric Roberts character, little bit hokey. Not the the Russian mobster dude. Pardon me. How unprofessional to sneeze on camera. Anyway, I always thought the mobsters were a little bit hokey. I really liked Scarecrow, so he's a little bit different. I just kind of felt overall that those supporting characters were better. Jim Gordon is a great supporting character, but the Robert Redford character, Nick Fury, Scarlett Johansson, these characters I just felt were a better level of secondary characters than the secondary characters in The Dark Knight. And we could spend all day going down a scorecard, and there will be a whole bunch of notches for The Dark Knight. There'll be a whole bunch of notches for Captain America Winter Soldier. And when it comes down to the word better is a very loose word, because really better is going to be defined differently by each person, because it's what is important to you. So we can go down this laundry list, in both columns, Dark Knight, check, 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 Captain America, check, 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 check. But then for a lot of us, it's going to come down to, well, which checks are more important checks than others? And to some, let's say, well, the checks that the Captain America has are the more important ones. And then others say, well, the checks in the Dark Knight aisle are the ones that are more important. So it'll really depend. I mean, so it's great. But we can all agree that the Dark Knight and Captain America Winter Soldier are both like another level of special kind of films. They're both excellent, excellent films. And it's just, for me personally right now, after seeing Captain America the Winter Soldier a few times, I got to tell you, for me, I'm willing to say for me now that Captain America Winter Soldier edges out The Dark Knight. Now, like I said, I've seen The Dark Knight 20 times. I've seen Captain America 3 times. Captain America Winter Soldier 3 times. Give me 7 or 8 more viewings and maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe some of the weaknesses, like The Dark Knight, to me was almost a perfect film the first time I saw it. And then the more I saw it, the more I really started to some of the weaknesses of the film started to bother me a little bit more and started to become more glaring weaknesses to me. And maybe the same thing will happen with Captain America once I've seen it a few more times. And I won't go into which parts of Captain America I think are the weaknesses of the film, because a lot of you still haven't seen it. It just opened 2 nights ago. A lot of you still haven't seen it. So we'll leave that for now. But anyway, that was my little opening rant about this Facebook post I put up today about me thinking Captain America is even better film than Dark Knight. But I mean, it's close. It's close. Now, do I think Captain America Winter Soldier is better than Avengers? Because now you got 2 films that are a little more similar. Like Dark Knight, Captain America Winter Soldier, very different films. Avengers and Captain America are also different films, but not as different as The Dark Knight and Captain America are. And so it's a little tougher for me at that point. I need some more viewings. Anyway, with that being said, let's get to the first mailbag question of the day. This is AMC Mailbag, so let's get to the first mailbag question. And the first mailbag question today comes to us from Dan Lee, who writes, "Hey, sons and daughters of AMC, I love the show, and I've been watching every day since I found out about you guys. Well, thanks a lot, Dan. Appreciate that. I feel that since Blade is more of an R-rated character, much like Deadpool, he wouldn't fit in very well with the Disney Marvel cinematic universe. I don't think it's very likely, but instead of shelving Blade or butchering the character to make him more family-friendly, what do you guys think about the idea of Marvel selling the movie rights to someone like Fox or Sony?" Well, Dan, you bring up an excellent point. I've actually been saying this for a while, is that Blade, while a good problem to have, Blade does present a problem. Characters like Blade, Punisher, Deadpool. Well, Deadpool's not with Marvel, but characters like Blade present a little bit of a problem to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because one of the things that makes the Marvel Cinematic Universe so great is that Kevin Feige has very carefully crafted this certain tone that goes with it. And you can have all these different characters. Thor is a very different character from Iron Man, who's a very different character from Captain America, who's a very different character from Bruce Banner, who's a very different character from Hawkeye. They're all different characters, but Kevin Feige and crew have found a way to make all of these different characters fit in a universe that have one continuous tone. And the universe of the cinematic universe has a particular tone to it. And an R-rated Blade character just doesn't fit into that universe. And so, Marvel gets the rights to Blade back, who's an awfully fun character. What do you do with them? I mean, you can't have him pop up in the Avengers because it's not really going to be the Blade we've already come to know and love. The Blade we know and love is going to swear a lot. He's going to be very brutal. There's going to be a lot of blood and guts, and there's going to be a whole lot of gratuitous violence. And that is just not something that fits well into the current cinematic universe. So what does Marvel do? And we've kind of talked about this a few times in Movie Talk. I mean, one of the options is that some people want to bring up, and you can understand why they'd bring it up, is we'll create have Marvel create like an Earth 2. Have Marvel create a separate cinematic universe. Have them create another cinematic universe where guys like Punisher and Blade exist, but the Avengers don't exist. And that way you can have your own cinematic universe that is a darker, an R-rated, more violent, more visceral kind of cinematic universe. And you can go that way. And there's some merit to that suggestion. And I'm not against that suggestion. But Marvel seems to all be about building this current cinematic universe. And do they really want to become side distracted? Because remember, they're just one studio. They can only make 2, maybe 3 films a year. Maybe 3 films a year. So do they want to be distracted instead of just working one cohesive universe? I don't know that they're willing to do that. So that becomes an issue with that right there. So I don't know. So the question you raise is, should they then just sell the rights back to somebody like Sony or somebody like Fox or somebody like Universal, somebody like Lionsgate? Should they make some money off of them, sell the rights for, I don't know what you'd sell the rights for a Blade for, maybe $150 million for the movie rights. Maybe the contract will look like this: $150 million for the movie rights to Blade. You have to at least be in the process of producing a new Blade film every 5 years. And if you don't, then the rights lapse back. Sony puts in, or Marvel puts in a buyback clause, say 5 times of the purchase price. So Marvel puts in a buyback clause that if Marvel ever wants him back, you have to be willing to sell him back for $700 million, which is a ridiculously high number, but it's got to be a ridiculously high number if you're going to have an automatic trigger sellback price. So $700 million back plus 6% of any box office revenue your future Blade films make. So Marvel makes a deal with Lionsgate. Says, okay, Lionsgate, you give us $150 million. We will sell you the rights, the movie-making rights to Blade with a 5-year production window. Every 5 years you have to be in production of a new Blade movie or else the rights come back to us. We put in an automatic trigger of a $600 million buyback. So if we ever want him back, we cut you a check for $600 million and you got to sell him back to us. And you give us 6% of any future, gross that your Blade films make. So that way, Blade is being made into a film. Blade fans will get their movies. Marvel makes some money. Lionsgate makes some money. Everybody's happy. Here's the problem, though. And I like that idea. I do. I like that idea. Here's the problem. Can Blade be a viable movie franchise right now? I'm going to say yes. I believe he can. I've had an argument with a friend of mine who thought he's no longer a viable movie franchise character, and I could see the validity of some of the points he was raising, but I still feel like he can work. I still feel Blade can work. In the right budget. You don't make a Blade film with a $200 million budget. You make a Blade film for a $65 million budget, a $50 million budget, a $70 million budget, somewhere in that window, And I still think he can be a viable and profitable movie franchise, and I think that can work. But I can totally see why some of my friends don't believe he can still work viably. But the bigger issue is this. Marvel went through a period of bankruptcy, and they sold off a bunch of their characters, and they have always regretted it. They have always regretted it. They have always regretted that they don't own the X-Men anymore. They have always regretted that they don't have the movie rights to Spider-Man anymore. They have always regretted that they do not have the movie rights to the Fantastic Four anymore. These are issues and things that they have always regretted. And now that Marvel has tons of gold coins in their purse and they're owned by Disney, I don't think Marvel ever wants to sell off another one of their characters again. I think Marvel would rather have Blade sit on their shelf collecting dust just in case 7 years from now we come up with a great Blade idea. We want him at our disposal and we want to use him. Now, also, not to mention, now that Fox is creating a superhero cinematic universe, they're going to be crossing over Fantastic Four with the X-Men universe. Now that Sony is creating a cinematic universe with not just Spider-Man, but they're going to be creating, the Sinister Six standalone films, the Venom. They're going to have others as well from within the Spider-Man universe. They want to make sure they don't want to contribute to other studios' cinematic universes, because if they sell off the rights to Blade, say to Fox, then Blade's going to show up in the X-Men Fantastic Four universe. If they sell off the rights to Sony, and those are the two, players in this game that would have the most money to spend, if they were to sell off the rights to Blade to Sony, they don't want Blade. Sony will put Blade into a Spider-Man film. And they don't want to contribute to the success of Spider-Man and the Sony Cinematic Universe. So I think it makes most sense for Marvel. Now, while I like the deal, sell it, have a buyback price, and get, take in a certain percentage of the revenue that any future movies make. I like that deal. But at the same time, I can see why I think Marvel would be in a position they'd say, nope, we are never letting our characters go again. We would rather have them sitting on the shelf just in case we feel like we can use them, and we don't want to contribute to the success of other studios' films. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so that is my very long way of answering your question of, do I think Marvel would sell them off? If I was in charge of Marvel, I would say let's consider it. But I think Marvel, the prevailing philosophy at Marvel right now is no way. We've sold off characters before and we've lived to regret it. We're just going to keep our characters, even if they're just sitting on the shelf, even if it's a great character like Blade. So anyway, let me know what you guys think. What would you do? If you were Kevin Feige, you were in charge of Marvel Studios, what would you do with this whole Blade situation? Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say about that. All right, let's move on to the next question today. And the next question today comes to us from Ardo Omer, who writes, I'm not sure if this was asked on the show before, but have they announced who will play J Jonah Jameson yet in The Amazing Spider-Man 2? Or are they saving that for when the audiences go to see the movie? I asked because I remember John and company having said that you guys wanted to have J.K. Simmons from the previous franchise to return to the role. I do too. I'm also basing the assumption that he'll be in the movie because you can't have Spidey as as an out and about superhero without some J Jonah Jameson to tear him down. Thanks a lot for the question, Andrew. And yes, this is J Jonah Jameson and J.K. Simmons are a very rare thing for me. And they're rare in this context. I completely believe if you are rebooting something or remaking something, you wipe all the past stuff away. I don't believe you should bring back the same director. I do not believe you should bring back any of the same actors. I believe if it is a reboot and you're starting over, you start fresh, you wipe everything else away. If you're rebooting Green Lantern, do not bring Ryan Reynolds back. If you're continuing with Green Lantern, bring Ryan Reynolds back. But if you're rebooting it, you don't bring anybody. You don't bring any of the villains, any of the actors who play the villains. You don't bring any of the actors. You don't bring any of them along. You start over. It's a reboot. You're starting over. But I have one exception to that rule. I have one personal exception to that rule. And that is, and I've always said this, from day one that they rebooted Spider-Man. If you're going to have J. Jonah Jameson, you bring back J.K. You bring back J.K. Simmons. That dude was born to play. J. Jonah Jameson. He's perfect. I mean, I've always said, and I still believe this, no matter what actor is playing what role, there is somebody out there who could do it better. I still believe that, totally, and I do believe that about J.K. Simmons and J. Jonah Jameson too. But I'm telling you right now, if I was in charge of Sony, and I was putting J. Jonah Jameson back into Spider-Man, I would have J.K. Simmons back again. I would. I just screw my rule about wiping all the old actors out and bringing in new actors. I would bring back J.K. Simmons. That is the one exception to my rule, and I would do it in a heartbeat. Now, that being said, getting back to the other part of your question, the reason they haven't announced who's playing J. Jonah Jameson in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is, to the best of my knowledge, J. Jonah Jameson is not in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And that does feel like a glaring omission, because J. Jonah Jameson, he is not Mary Jane level important. He is not Aunt May level important. He is not Oscorp level important, but he is an important character in the Spider-Man mythology. He is synonymous with Spider-Man in many ways. Not one of the top 4 or 5 most important characters, but he's up there, and people know the name, and he's a standby. And I like the way you described it in your email too. You said it's hard to imagine Spidey swing around the city without a J. Jonah Jameson there busting his balls. You know, it feels like he should be there. And with them having plans for The Amazing Spider-Man 3 and The Amazing Spider-Man 4, I have to believe at some point they're going to bring him in, but I don't think it's going to be The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, Sony has already started putting out viral marketing, like fake The Daily Bugle news articles and editorials from J. Jonah Jameson, from the desk of J. Jonah Jameson. So that's cool too, and that suggests to me that they have the character on their radar. They're going to bring him in at some point. I just don't think it's going to be in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But when they do bring him in, and they will eventually, I'm with you. My fingers are crossed that they bring back JK. I would love to see JK playing in The Amazing Spider-Man. All right, let's move on to the next question. And the next question today comes to us from Christopher Raiolo, who writes, the animated movie Megamind. I watched it recently because I was bored and ended up loving it and was wondering if you think it could get a sequel. Thanks, and keep up the great work. You know, Megamind... Interesting side fact, Megamind was the first movie that I actually did an interview with Will Ferrell for. My first interview with Will Ferrell that I ever did was for Megamind. And I've spoken with him a number of times since then, but that was the first one I ever did. And I was really excited because I'm a big Will Ferrell fan. Don't love all of his movies, but I'm a big Will Ferrell fan. And the interesting thing about Megamind, and to answer your question, no, I don't think they have any plans to bring it back. Let me pull up some... box office. Let me pull up some facts and figures here that I should have pulled up earlier, to be honest, but I did not. So Megamind, when it was in theater, look, it made $321 million worldwide. That's great. That's awesome. Now, it did probably cost more than it should have. It cost about $130 million to make. I don't know why it cost that much. So it made money. It was profitable, but not as profitable really as it could have been. That being said, it did make money. It's a profitable movie. $321 million worldwide is nothing to sneeze at. But the reviews weren't great. And to be honest, I wasn't all that impressed with it. I wanted to like it more. There are certainly some really funny moments in Megamind, no doubt. But to me, it fell a little bit short. And I don't think anybody particularly loved it. I don't think the studio particularly loved it. I don't think Will Ferrell is one of his most beloved characters. And while it made money, I think there's a very good, reasonable reason to look at the numbers and say, if we make another one, it will make less. Not to mention, the movie came out like 4 years ago. So it's a little bit too little too late at this point. It brings up another interesting question. I remember between both Megamind and films like Despicable Me, both kind of gave us the promise of making a movie about the bad guy, right? But both movies weren't movies about the bad guy. They were both movies about guys who were bad guys, but were maybe just kind of misunderstood and really actually have a good heart, and at some point will turn around and do the right thing. So really, they're not movies about the bad guy. They're movies about bad guy characters who become good. And that's what they're about, really. I think we have still yet to see a comic book or an anime film, whatever, movie that is truly about the bad guy. And that's what makes this whole thing that Sony is doing a Sinister Six movie so interesting. Because you know the Sinister Six ain't going to become heroes. And it'll be very interesting to see them do a movie about the bad guy. I think Marvel is watching that very closely, because if Sony can do a movie with the bad guys about the bad guys, I think a Loki movie gets put into production almost right away. I think the only reason they haven't done a Loki movie or haven't made plans to do a Loki movie is because the question still lingers. Can you really do a movie about the bad guy where the bad guy's actually bad? Don't know. We haven't really seen it yet. And Megamind kind of promised that, much like Despicable Me kind of promised that, but neither actually delivered. So anyway, getting back to the basic core issue of your question, no, I don't think we're going to see a Megamind sequel. I mean, we could be surprised and they may do it at some point, but honestly, I don't think there's the motivation there for the studio to do it. But I'm glad you liked it. All right, let's move on to the next question. And the next question today comes to us from Dalton. And Dalton writes, with all the great Marvel villains, by the way, Ray, one of the guys who works with us at AMC Movie News is Ray. And he just started working with us about 2 months ago. And Ray is the guy who started putting all these images behind the mailbag questions, and he does a great job. I love this graphic that he put together. Anyway, Dalton writes, with all the great Marvel villains still out there, like Loki, Winter Soldier, and Abomination, could you see a bad guy version of the Avengers? Maybe with a Sinister Six / Suicide Squad feel. Thoughts? Thanks for the amazing show and keep up the great work. Thanks a lot, Dalton. Well, I mean, really, much like I just kind of addressed in the last question, we haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen a movie about the bad guys. And, let me bring this graphic up again because I love this kind of graphic. You look at this roster in the background there. That's a pretty cool roster. Would I like to see a movie where all these kind of guys are working together? Yeah, that would be cool. But can it actually work? I don't know yet. And so without, just kind of repeating everything I said in the last question, let's move on to the next one. But it's a great question, Dalton. I think it's a very cool concept. Let's see if it can actually work, though. All right, the next question that we have today comes to us from Yumi Ako. And Yumi writes, why does the AMC crew, John Campea, that dastardly dude in particular, always take shots at movies they don't like? For example, whenever the Star Wars prequel trilogy or The Dark Knight Rises is mentioned, they always, or rather John always, and I mean always, says how horrible he thinks they are, or how disappointed he was in them. I'm not trying to defend these movies. It's just rather unprofessional and childlike. There are people that actually like these movies that you didn't like. I'm not saying don't state your opinion, but bashing movies you don't like at every opportunity? Come on, man. Show some professionalism. Well, let's be clear here. Number one, let's clear a couple things up. I don't hate The Dark Knight Rises. Do I think it is the weakest by far of the Batman trilogy? Yes. Do I think it is worthy of being one of the Nolan Batman films? No, I don't. But I still stand by the fact that, it's a decent movie. It's a good movie, but the problem is it's not just a movie. It is a part of the Nolan Batman trilogy. And to me, I think if you're honest with yourself, it does not hold a candle to the other two films in the Nolan trilogy. And it kind of feels like to me, like Nolan had checked out. It's almost like he wasn't really all that interested in coming back and doing the third film. And he had already mentally moved on to this next film that he's doing that looks incredible called Interstellar. But that's just me. But look, you got to understand something. A couple things to keep in mind here. No matter what I say about a movie, how great I think a movie is, if I think it's one of the all-time best, whether I say I think Captain America Winter Soldier is better than The Dark Knight, whether I think a piece of movie is just trash or utter, no matter what I say, anything I say about any movie, unless it's a fact, like this movie made $127.2 million at the box office, that's a fact. That's not an opinion, that's a fact. I say this movie is great, that's an opinion. If it's not, remember I always say this, the difference, if you want to know what's the difference between a fact and an opinion, it's this. Is it measurable? Is it quantifiably measurable? I mean, I can say I'm 6 feet tall. Well, that is quantifiably measurable. You can take a tape measure and actually measure me and quantifiably say, yes, you are 6 feet, or no, you are not. You can quantifiably say this movie runs 2 hours, 12 minutes, and 23 seconds because we have this unit of measurement called time, and you can measure that, and you can quantifiably say this is the truth. Saying The Avengers is the greatest comic book movie of all time is not quantifiable. There's no measuring stick for that. There's no quantifiable, real, empirical measurement for that. Therefore, it's opinion. And that's the great thing about movies. It's all opinion, and we get to all have different pieces of opinion. I say this all the time, but it's the biggest truth about movies. Film is art, right? And I can hang a piece of art on this wall behind me, right? I can hang a piece of art, and we can have 10 of us stand around it and look at it, and we're looking at the same piece of art, and yet all 10 of us could see 10 different things. Even though we're looking at the same thing, I could see something different than you are seeing. You could be seeing something different than the guy standing on your left is seeing. And that is the great thing about film, and why we can have these great debates and whatever about, what's the greatest movie ever made, is, how good or bad was Green Lantern, well, and we can have those debates. So whenever I say this movie is a piece of crap and this movie's awesome and this movie's whatever, I say that, but you as an audience member are smart enough to understand that it all falls under the umbrella of it's all subjective. It's all opinion. So I will never call you an idiot if you say you really loved, I don't know, what's a mediocre film? Hangover 2, okay? At least you say you love The Hangover 2. Look, I'll keep telling you, Hangover 2 is a terrible movie. It was just one of the worst sequels ever conceived of, blah, 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 blah. But that's my opinion. It falls under the umbrella of, subjectivity. But I can say, I think you're nuts, if you liked Hangover 2, whatever, that's playing around. But what you'll never hear me say is you are wrong or you're stupid if you think that, because it's just subjective. It's just opinion. So we can use verbiage and whatever, and be saying, you're nuts, you're crazy. What, are you insane? You liked that movie? But it's all under the umbrella of subjectivity, right? So that's fine. So let's get to the real heart of the matter, Yumi, here. Let's be honest here. Let's take off the kitty gloves here and have a heart-to-heart about honesty here. You are one of these Star Wars prequel defenders. That's what this is really all about. And like I said, I already said for the record, I don't hate The Dark Knight Rises. I actually think it's a good movie, but I just think it pales in comparison and not worthy of the Nolan Batman name. All right? But Star Wars, the prequels, are some of the biggest pieces of human large and small intestine waste, you know what I'm saying, that has ever defiled the silver screen and brutally took advantage of my eyeballs. They're horrible pieces of trash. All right? That is it. But it's my opinion. I'm not going to call you an idiot for liking it, whatever. But the real thing is here, let's be honest, and I get this from people sometimes, you're just a little bit butthurt that they're movies that you like, and I keep saying that I think they're terrible. But deal with it. Deal with it. You're going to have to embrace this understanding that, look, I am not, the be-all, end-all of what movies are good and bad. I'm not. But I am doing a show that is predicated on me giving my opinion and giving you my thoughts and my enthusiasm, and I approach it as a film fan. I am a film fan. And I have all the passion as a film fan that a lot of people have as being sports fans. And so therefore, when I really like something, I will go on and on and on and on and on about why I like it and how much I like it, and I'll give it its due. But if there's something I really hate, or I think was a particular crime against filmgoers in general, I will continuously go back and mention that too. It is what I do because I am a film fan and I talk about it. And if you don't like it, don't watch me. But, if you're intelligent and you know that you don't have to agree with me to enjoy a conversation with me. Like the people I enjoy talking with movies about the most. Like here, I'll just pull up one example. I got a friend of mine, Chris Tapley. He's one of the head guys over at HitFix. HitFix is a great entertainment site. For most of you probably know it, but some of you may not. And he's one of the best like award seasons coverage guy in the business. He's awesome. And he's a good friend of mine. But he and I could not agree less. I mean, it's just, we disagree so much on so many, many different things when it comes to film and when it comes to movies. We will just disagree about everything. And yet he's one of my favorite guys to talk to about film. Not because he agrees with me, because we very rarely agree. Maybe like 30% of the time we agree. But because we enjoy each other's different perspectives and why we hold those perspectives. And so I've always said this, and I truly believe it. I don't want viewers who just agree with me. What's the point? Where is the fun in that? I want us to disagree. Now, I'll never lie to you and pretend like I disagree with a popular opinion just so we can have some discussion. I'll never do that. I'll always be honest. But if you're always honest, then the differences in our opinions will always come up. And that's fun to me. I have fun going into the chat board and reading saying, hey, John, you said this, but I got to disagree with you because if you look at this, and I love reading those comments. Don't get me wrong. I also love reading the, John, you're awesome. You're always right. I love those comments too, but it's not about agreeing with each other. But if you're going to get butthurt because you hear me bag on a movie, and if you are a fan of the prequels, you're just going to have to grit your teeth and accept that I'm going to bag on the prequels whenever they come up, because those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. And I never want us to never forget the tragedy of the Star Wars prequels and the refuse that spewed out of the large and small intestines of George Lucas on the rest of us. And George Lucas is one of my heroes, by the way. He's a god amongst men, in my opinion. Anyway, but let's be honest. But this brings up another issue. It's always funny to me because all of us think some movies are good. All of us think some movies are bad. All of us like this actor, and all of us like and dislike some other actors. All of us do. None of you watching right now loves every actor and loves every movie and loves everything. None of us do. That would be stupid of us to do that. We like things and we don't like things. But I get driven a little bit of crazy when I come across people who do this, who are like, yeah, they like and don't like movies, but if you criticize a movie they like, they'll go, oh, well, I do. You couldn't do any better. Oh, that's a great argument. Really? So because I couldn't make a better movie than, say, Spider-Man 3, because hell, and everybody knows Spider-Man 3 is terrible, but if I had made Spider-Man 3 and it turned out just as bad, I would have thought it was awesome. If, like, holy crap, I was able to do that. But guess what? I am not Sam Raimi. I am not a professional Hollywood filmmaker. I've made some films or whatever, but I've made them as a guy who just loves films. I am not a professional Hollywood film director. And so just saying to me, you couldn't have done any better, that's not really saying anything. That's not saying anything at all. I mean, who cares that I couldn't have done any better? That doesn't justify. We are judging, and that's what it's art. We are judging and evaluating these films that we watched based on the Hollywood scale, not on what does some dude, some nobody dude make. But anyway, the point that really gets me frustrated is like, if, people say, well, you could have done any better. It's like, what? Are you telling me you don't criticize movies? Of course you do. If I say, I don't think this guy is a good actor. You're just jealous. You just don't understand. You're just jealous. Really? So any actor you don't like, it's just because you're jealous? I mean, that kind of thing drives me a little bit crazy. So anyway, Yumi, what it comes down to for me is it's clear you are just a fan of the Star Wars prequels and you don't like that I bag on them. But guess what? If I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be a legit and just kind of be what you see is what you get with me, and if I'm going to be, transparent, and if I'm going to be authentic, and if I'm going to be real, that's how I talk about the Star Wars prequels, even when just me and my buddies are hanging out. And I'm not a good enough actor to pretend to be somebody else. I'm just not good enough at it. So why bother? I'm just going to be me. And me is, the Star Wars prequels are an abomination, a blight on the face of humanity, if you will, and should be wiped away. I wish they could, but they can't. But I'm not taking away from the fact that if you like it, that's awesome. I'm glad you like it. There's nothing I can do about it. It's out there and they exist. And if they're going to be out there or exist, then I'm glad you get some enjoyment out of it. Believe me, I am. I'm not being facetious. I'm actually legitimately glad you like it. But that's not going to, and I don't want you to ever stop expressing your love for them if you love them. But I'm never going to stop expressing my disappointment in them because I'm disappointed in them. And if you call that lack of professionalism, so be it. I've never accused myself of being a professional. If you want to say that means say that's being childish, so be it. If you want to resort to name calling because you're butthurt because I'm insulting a movie you like, so be it. I will never do that to you. But anyway, let's move on. So the next question today, I spent too much time on that. I'm sorry, guys. The next question today comes to us from John Morelli, who writes, "Hey guys, love the show. My question is, will good vampire or werewolf movies ever be made again? Or are they stuck in teen girl rom-com forever? Thanks and keep up the great work." Man, John, you bring up a great question because I was at the house the other day, and my brother-in-law and a few of us were watching Blade 3 came up. Blade 3 was on TV. And it's a bad movie. But what really stood out to me, I remember the first time I saw Blade 3, and I remember walking out of the theater and saying this: when did vampires all become a bunch of wussies? I didn't say wussies, though. I said something else that rhymed with wussies, but I can't say that in Mailbag. I said to myself, when did vampires all become a bunch of wussies? I mean, because back in the day, vampire, you're screwed. Vampire coming after you, you're screwed. You got to come up with something pretty damn special, some elaborate plan. You got to find the old artifact there. You got to do something extraordinary if you got a vampire after you. Then we come to Blade 3. And it's like, oh, look, just a human girl. No super Jessica Biel. Just a normal human girl, no superpowers, no super strength, no super anything, blah, blah, blah. She can take out 15 vampires like that. Vampires became wussies. Vampires used to be these scary, menacing, terrifying creatures. The last really good vampire movie I've seen, 30 Days a Night. I love 30 Days a Night. That's a great vampire movie. And to me, it was the last vampire movie that really gave us that classic, you best beware of vampires. Not sparkling in the sunlight and, oh, they're actually kind creatures who just misunderstood and blah, blah, and they're so soft and wussy and where's another good werewolf movie? I mean, it's been a long time since American Werewolf in London. So I think do I think we'll get back to that? Yes, because I think everything in Hollywood goes in cycles. So I do think the cycle is coming where we will get back to hardcore vampire films. I do believe that day is coming. And I do believe there will always be room for the different vampire story, for a vampire who's a hero, for a Blade. Blade is a daywalker, and he's the good guy. He fights vampires. Angel was the same thing. I always believe there will be room for those stories, but I want to see some more 30 Days a Night. I want to see some more Lost Boys. Lost Boys might be my favorite vampire movie of all time, actually. It shouldn't be, but I think it is. I really love that movie, but I want more of the Lost Boys. I want more 30 Days a Night. I want these kinds of vampire movies again. Do I think it'll happen? Yes, because everything goes in cycles. And I believe the cycle is coming again when we will get some hardcore badass vampire movies again. So I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, let's go on to the final question today. And the final question today comes from Quinn Lai, who writes, I just got done watching Captain America 2 and loved it so much. My question is, with the end credits Marvel does at the end of each movie, why do they tease a future Marvel movie scene first and leave the second end credit scene relating to the current Marvel movie? I feel like if they switched it around and put the end credit scenes relating to Cap first, it would make more audience wanting to wait for the preview tease at to the next Marvel movie after the end credits run through. Well, Quinn, it's a good observation. I had never really thought of it that way. And you're right. I mean, it's becoming a pattern because there are two end credit scenes. By the way, if you haven't seen Captain America 2 yet, there are two end credit scenes. One that's mid-credits, and then one at the very, very end of the credits. So make sure you stick around for both. And so the question is, why don't they flip it around? Because the mid-end credit scene teases a future Marvel movie. And then the end credit scene is a bonus-like end credit scene that relates to the movie you just watched. So the question is, why don't they reverse that to motivate more people to stick around to the end? And I think the two answers to that is because they don't care. They put in these post-credit scenes as, bonuses, as just an extra little wink and an extra gift to the fans. Does anybody, did we need to see that scene at the end of Thor where Loki pokes his head back around, says, well, isn't this interesting? Did we need to see that to understand the Avengers? No. It was just a fun little extra bonus for us as fans. And whether or not we stick around to watch them, I don't think Marvel cares. Nor should they care. They're just bonuses. They're up to us if we want to stick around. And I'll say this too. I think a lot of people, it took a few years for people to realize they need to stick around during the credits to see a bonus scene. And there's still a lot of people who don't get it. There's still a lot of people who the movie ends and they get up and walk out and then go, what? There was an extra scene in the credits? I didn't know. I think a lot of people do realize that now. But I think a lot of people still don't realize there's usually now a second end credit scene in the Marvel film. So, watching Captain America 2, the credits start to roll. A few people get up and leave, but most people wait. And then the first credit scene comes up. And when it ends, 80% of the people get up and walk out. And there's only like 10% of the audience left that stick around to the end. I think it's just a matter of audiences learning that when you go to a Marvel film, expect to. Now, I had Kevin Feige in my studio a few weeks ago, and he said, look, we never say it's a rule that we have to put in the end credits. Granted. But it is their pattern. It is what they seem to be doing. Even though it's not a rule for them, it does seem to be what they plan on doing. So as long as they keep doing that, I think eventually, like audiences learn to stick around for the first credit scene, I think audiences will just learn, just because you saw one post-credit scene doesn't mean there's not another one coming, and more people will wait. And I don't think it matters what order you put them in. I think if they switched the order, a lot of people would have seen the first one and thought, okay, that's it, and they would have got up and left. So it's just a matter of the audience learning, and I think we will, and I think the audience will figure it out. All right, folks, well, that'll do it for me today. Thank you for joining me on AMC Mailbag. Once again, listen, if you've got a topic or a question you want us to bring up on this show, AMC Mailbag, or on AMC Movie Talk during the week, you can email us anytime at amcmovietalk@gmail.com. And don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter and send questions to us on Twitter, too, sometimes if you'd like, at AMC Movie News. And listen, don't forget, lots of great films, including and especially Captain America 2, playing in AMC theaters right now. Get your tickets at www.amctheaters.com. So head on over there for your theater, showtime, and movie ticket information. As for me, follow me on Twitter. I say lots of interesting things. I don't know if I do or not. But anyway, follow me on Twitter. On Twitter, you can find me at John Campia. And you can also follow me on Facebook or on Instagram. And I'm starting to use Instagram a little bit more because I'm having some fun with that. But you can follow me there as well. So thanks a lot for joining us today, guys. My name is John Campia for AMC Movie News. And until next time, bye-bye.